Welcome back to the show today. We are asking the question, at what age does an NBA player hit his prime? At what age is the human body fully developed but hasn't yet started to fall apart? When does an NBA player fully understand the game of basketball but still has the physical capacity to use their elite ball knowledge? Well, obviously this is going to vary for each player. Some players develop more quickly than others. Some players start to deteriorate faster than other players. My guess is that the average NBA player peaks at about 28 years old. I say 28 because I feel like a man's physical body is fully developed by then. Physically, they're as strong as they're ever going to be. Also, they couldn't have accumulated that many injuries up until that point. The more your ligaments wear and tear, the less effectively they're able to regenerate, and the more likely they are to tear those muscles again. So at 28, hopefully their body hasn't taken that much damage. Also at 28, they're entering their 9th or 10th year in the NBA. So I'd expect they'd have played like 500 games by now. They've experienced every basketball scenario at least once or twice. They're not making stupid rookie mistakes anymore. They're not unchecked and a fool, hopefully. But evidently I'm wrong. According to researchers, 26 is the prime age for an NBA player. Well, at least for guards. A guard is in his prime in the NBA at about 26 years old. This makes sense because speed, agility, and explosiveness are the defining characteristics of an NBA guard. Being a guard in the NBA is a young man's game, especially smaller guards who rely on beating their defender to their spot. So as a guard in the NBA draft, I think being explosive is the equivalent of a center being 7 feet tall. Being 7 feet tall in NCAA basketball is kind of a cheat code. You're gonna dominate because you're at a physical advantage, since most of the players in the NCAA are way shorter than you. But once these 7-footers get into the NBA and they're playing against other 7-footers who have skill, that physical advantage is gone. That was Mo Bamba being welcomed to the NBA in 2018 by Joel Embiid. So the guard version of that is being explosive. Guys like Colin Sexton, Ben Simmons, John Wall, guys who peaked earlier in their career because their calling card was their speed. I think the best example though is probably Derrick Rose, who peaked at the age of 22 and won MVP. But after multiple knee injuries, he lost his explosiveness. And after the age of 25, he spent most of his career as a backup point guard. So let's take a look at some of the best point guards in the NBA and try to figure out where they peak. Let's start with, you know who I'm gonna say. Chris Paul. My man is 40 years old and he's played 20 years in the league. I think it's safe to say that Chris Paul's prime has come and gone. I even think CP3 would admit that. When you imagine Chris Paul, you probably imagine him in a Clippers uniform, throwing lobs to DeAndre Jordan and Blake Griffin. That team was good, so his peak was probably between 2011 and 2017, right? No, it wasn't. Chris Paul was significantly more impactful when he was a Hornet or a Pelican. Specifically in 2008 and 2009, when he was 22 and 23. Chris Paul averaged more points, more assists, and more steals while he was a Pelican than he ever did at any other point in his career. During those years, Chris Paul finished 5th in DPOY voting. And in 2008, he finished 2nd in MVP voting. He almost stole Kobe Bryant's only MVP award. People forget about this era of Chris Paul. He was arguably the best player in the league. And it's because Chris Paul had the passing precision and court vision that he still does have now. But he also had a killer isolation game. He was also very fast down the floor and very dynamic. So the fact that CP3 developed his basketball IQ very early in his career and his athletic peak was in parallel with his intellectual peak, I think this era of Chris Paul was the best example of a point guard in NBA history. And you can't argue with me. You're not allowed. But let's get a little bit philosophical, okay? Is it possible for an NBA player to be more valuable to their team after their prime? Is it possible that there's some intangible, immeasurable value they bring to their team that isn't on the stat sheet? Yeah, I think so. I think Chris Paul is actually the best example of that too. So for a personal contribution aspect, I think 23 was the prime age for Chris Paul. But I think the most value he brought to a team was actually with the Phoenix Suns at the age of 35 years old. Chris Paul was averaging 16 points and 9 assists. This was actually very low for his career. But Chris Paul still finished 5th in MVP voting, which is pretty crazy. Those are not MVP numbers. The reason he got MVP votes was because the Suns sucked before he got there. Like, were really bad. Devin Booker had been in the league for 5 seasons and he'd never made the playoffs. Devin Booker was not a serious player. He was seen as a good stats, bad team guy, and he was known for being a faucet on defense. If you were an NBA fan between 2018 and 2020, you know I'm not making this up. You remember this photo? This was the Suns team cheesing after Devin Booker dropped 70 points on the Boston Celtics in a loss. Look at these smiles. Would you believe these men just lost a basketball game? Even Duds is smiling. What the f? duds. The Suns were truly an embarrassing franchise before Chris Paul got there. But once Chris Paul arrived, they were the second best team in the NBA that following season, and they made the NBA Finals. Chris Paul changed that team's culture and turned the franchise around completely. Now they're back to being a joke. Maybe they shouldn't have traded Chris Paul. Maybe they shouldn't have traded Chris Paul for Bradley Beal. Yep, that was the deal. Pretty much straight up. So we've talked about NBA players who peaked early. Let's talk about NBA players that peaked late in their career. Well, Kyle Lowry didn't become an NBA All-Star until he was 28 years old. It was in his 9th season in the league, and he didn't even become a starter until 5 seasons in. His peak actually came 10 years into his career when he finished 10th in MVP voting. I know, Lowry getting MVP votes, crazy. And also Steve Nash. He was a bit of a late bloomer. He didn't hit his stride until he was traded to the Dallas Mavericks, and Don Nelson started him next to Dirk Nowitzki. He was able to showcase his passing and become an All-Star at 27 years old. But his real prime came when he went back to the Phoenix Suns and played with Mike D'Antoni, where he won 2 league MVPs at the age of 30 and 31 years old. I think the best example, though, of a late prime is Chauncey Billups. Chauncey Billups was the 3rd pick overall in the 1997 NBA draft, and up until his 8th year in the league, he was considered a draft bust. He'd been on 5 different teams, he'd been passed around the league quite a bit, and he really just never made an impact. But something just clicked for him when he got to Detroit in 2002. He stopped turning the ball over. He slowed the game down, he started calling more plays, he just controlled the game, and he became one of the best clutch shot makers in the league, taking the Pistons to a championship and shooting 47% from 3. That's where he won the Finals MVP. He hadn't even been an All-Star, and he won the Finals MVP. That's also how he got the name Mr. Big Shot. I know how to work that into the script. Now, I want to end this by talking about my favorite player, Nikola Jokic. Is Nikola Jokic at his peak right now? Have we already seen Jokic at his best, or is it still ahead of us? The man is 30 years old. For most NBA players, it's really just downhill from here. Well, let's take a look at Jokic's stats from last season and see if he's on the decline. He's not. He's not on the decline at all. Last season was his best season. He averaged 29.4 points a game. That's a career high. He averaged 10.2 assists per game. That's a career high as well. And 1.8 steals a game. Guess what? Career high. And if you're wondering about rebounds, he averaged 12.7 a game. He's only averaged higher 1 time in his career. In all 4 of those categories, he finished top 3 last season. How many times has that been done before in NBA history? Never. Literally never happened. On top of that, Jokic started shooting a lot of threes last season. He shot 4.7 a game and made 2 of those. That's the exact same as Karl Anthony Towns. That's good. It's 41%. So at this point, I want to say that Jokic has peaked, but every year he outdoes himself statistically. If Jokic somehow has a better season than he did last year, it would kind of feel like a miracle, like miraculous, like a biblical miracle, you know? Okay, thank you for being here. Also, a lot of people subscribed last week because I asked you to, so thanks. And then if you could like the video, if you could do me 2 favors and like the video, that'd be great. There is a Patreon, there's a podcast every week, every Saturday, but you only get charged $2 a month. But you get a show every Saturday. Be good to your mothers. Eat a corn dog.